Keir Starmer faced renewed calls to resign this week following a new revelation about his appointment of Peter Mandelson. The controversy has brought political turmoil to centre stage, and it feels different this time because it's not about a single mistake or isolated incident. Instead, what has quietly been building in the background is becoming impossible to overlook. The government is not dealing with separate problems, but moving from one crisis to another, from one controversy to another, in a way that is starting to feel like a pattern. When a government appears constantly reactive rather than in control, serious questions about leadership emerge. That is exactly where Starmer now finds himself.
Prime Minister, why do you always end up sounding like the passenger in this government rather than the driver? Are you really expecting us to believe that a senior civil servant off his own back, without any sort of direction about the importance of Peter Mandelson being ambassador, unilaterally overruled security vetting to approve a political appointment, and they made clear it was political?
I was not told that he had failed security vetting. No minister was told that he had failed security vetting. Number 10 wasn't told that he had failed security vetting.
What makes this moment significant is that Starmer did not come to power as just another politician. He made a specific promise to restore order after years of political turbulence. He was supposed to be the steady hand, the detail-focused leader, the one who would bring professionalism back to government. That was the contrast, that was the appeal, and for a time it worked. But the problem with building a leadership identity around competence and integrity is that when those qualities are questioned, the damage is far greater. It no longer looks like a mistake, it looks like a contradiction. So Keir Starmer has been accused of sacking the top civil servant in the Foreign Office to save his own position. The Prime Minister fired Sir Ollie Robbins, the Foreign Office Permanent Under-Secretary, over the Mandelson vetting fiasco on Thursday night after he and Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, withdrew their confidence in him. Sir Ollie's departure came hours after news broke that Lord Mandelson had failed the enhanced vetting process for his appointment as ambassador to the US, but was given the post anyway after civil servants dismissed the findings. At the centre of all of this is the appointment of Peter Mandelson. But this situation is no longer really about him, it's about what his appointment represents. Because what has now emerged is that Mandelson failed security vetting before taking on one of the most sensitive diplomatic roles in the country, and yet the appointment still went ahead. That alone raises serious questions, but what makes it even more damaging is the explanation that has followed. Because the government's position is that the Prime Minister did not know, and that is where the situation becomes incredibly difficult to defend. Reuters reported, following the resignation of Labour veteran Peter Mandelson as US ambassador over his ties to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, Starmer had managed to win a brief reprieve from his critics after limiting Britain's role in US President Donald Trump's and Israel's war in Iran. However, on Thursday, it emerged that Mandelson had failed the security vetting conducted before his appointment as envoy. Starmer's team said the Prime Minister had been unaware of this information. There are only two ways to interpret that. Either the Prime Minister knew, or he did not. If he knew, then the decision to proceed becomes the issue. But if he did not know, then something arguably more serious is exposed, which is a failure of communication at the very heart of government. Because it is impossible to ignore the scale of this decision. This is not a minor role. This is the UK ambassador to the United States, one of the most important diplomatic positions in the country. And yet we're being asked to believe that such a significant development, a failed security vetting, never reached the Prime Minister. And that is why so many people are struggling with this explanation, because it raises a deeper question. How can a Prime Minister lead the nation effectively if critical information is not reaching him? The fallout from the news first reported by The Guardian has been significant. Politicians and journalists across the board have expressed shock at these developments. Take a look at some of the reactions. Take a look at this clip of LBC's Ian Dale reacting to the news.
Because it is inconceivable that a Prime Minister would not know that his nominee for ambassador to Washington had failed the security vetting. And if it is really true that he didn't know, what does that say about the kind of government he is running, that no one thought to tell the Prime Minister of this country that Peter Mandelson had failed the security vetting? Now, I do find that inconceivable. I'm not going to call the Prime Minister a liar, but he needs to explain his conduct here.
Take a look at this clip of the shadow Northern Ireland Secretary Alex Burkhart speaking on Times Radio, where he says that Keir Starmer showed either grotesque incompetence or an attempt to conceal in his handling of Peter Mandelson's appointment as British ambassador to the United States.
Number 10 started to talk about it. And so it is cover up after cover up. It is lie after lie. And this is, what have we seen so far? We've seen the ambassador to Washington go. We've seen the Downing Street chief of staff, the Downing Street head of comms. We've seen the cabinet secretary. We've now seen the senior mandarin in the Foreign Office go. The more one pulls on this thread, the more scalps fall. Ultimately, the Prime Minister is responsible. This was his appointment. It was his responsibility to make sure the process was followed properly. Yeah. It was his responsibility to tell Parliament things that were true. He did not tell Parliament things were true, and he did not correct the record. He is wrong on every single score. He has behaved disgracefully. I think his time is up.
I've just been speaking to Keir Starmer. He is absolutely furious with the situation where he was not informed. He says that the security vetting for Peter Mandelson was failed by the security department. And he says the top official in the Foreign Office, Ollie Robbins, nevertheless waved through his ability to seize secret documents without telling him, any minister or anyone in number 10. The point of the interview that the Prime Minister's just done is to convey the anger at this situation, the fact that led him to mislead Parliament, according to critics, to say that Peter Mandelson passed the vetting when he hadn't in a press conference on February the 5th. This is deeply embarrassing for Keir Starmer, and he is finding and making clear that there are people to blame, and he is angry. But Sam, there are challenges and limits with this approach.
Keir Starmer himself has said he is absolutely furious at not being told Peter Mandelson failed security vetting.
I wasn't told that it failed security vetting when I was telling Parliament that due process had been followed is unforgivable. Not only was I not told, no minister was told. And I'm absolutely furious about that. What I intend to do is to go to Parliament on Monday to set out all the relevant facts in true transparency so Parliament has the full picture.
Senior Minister Darren Jones said on Friday Starmer was furious over not being told about Mandelson's failure to pass the security vetting. I don't think it brings the Prime Minister's future into question, Jones said, acknowledging that the system which had meant Foreign Office officials failed to communicate the vetting failure to ministers had undermined the Prime Minister and the government. Downing Street moved swiftly late on Thursday to try to quash the scandal, sacking the Foreign Office's top official. The response from government has been immediate. People have been removed. Statements have been issued. There has been a clear attempt to contain the situation. But actions like this often have a double effect. On the one hand, they show that something is being done. But on the other hand, they highlight just how serious the issue is. Because when senior figures begin to lose their positions, it sends a signal that this is not a routine mistake. It's something deeper. And it raises another question. If this much has already happened, is this really the end of the story, or is it just the beginning? More information should come out over the next few days, and that could give us a clearer picture of who knew what and when. But whether we'll actually see things like private messages or any kind of clear smoking gun is still uncertain. This is where the wider context becomes impossible to ignore. This is not the first time this government has found itself under pressure. Over recent months, there have been multiple moments where the government has been involved in scandals and crisis. What makes this moment even more significant is that it does not exist in isolation. Over recent months, this government has faced a series of very specific controversies involving senior figures, each adding to the pressure. Angela Rayner has faced intense scrutiny over her tax affairs and past property arrangements, with questions over whether the correct tax was paid. Rushanara Ali has been criticised over her links to groups and events that have sparked political backlash. Tulip Siddiq has faced scrutiny over her connections to Bangladesh and questions around political associations abroad. Andrew Gwynn has come under fire for controversial remarks. On top of that, there's been wider criticism over freebies, with questions around gifts and hospitality accepted by ministers. Taken together, these are not vague concerns. They are specific issues that, combined, create a growing sense of pressure around Starmer's government. Whether it's economic pressures, rising costs, international tensions or political controversies, the pattern is the same. The government reacts, it tries to contain, it moves on. And then something else emerges. That is why this situation feels different, because it is not happening in isolation, it's happening as part of a broader sequence of events that is starting to look like a government stumbling from one crisis to another. Kemi Badenoch, leader of the opposition Conservative Party, described Starmer's defence as preposterous, and Nigel Farage, the leader of Labour's main electoral challenger, the populist Reform UK Party, said it was blatant dishonesty. Both lamented the loss of Robbins, who Farage described as a professional civil servant. Badenoch said on X that working for Starmer was now one of the most dangerous occupations in the UK, referring to the early departure of Starmer's closest aide. There are few known survivors. The reaction from critics has become increasingly sharp, but one comment in particular captures the mood around the situation. Kemi Badenoch described working for Keir Starmer as now one of the most dangerous occupations in the UK, adding that there are few known survivors. It's a striking line, but it reflects a growing perception that when things go wrong, it's often those around the Prime Minister who take the fall. In just a short space of time, several high-profile figures have either stepped down or come under pressure, and while each case has its own context, together they create a powerful narrative. Peter Mandelson has been at the centre of this controversy, with fresh scrutiny over his appointment after it emerged he had failed security vetting. Sir Ollie Robbins, one of the most senior civil servants in the Foreign Office, has also been pushed out after confidence in his position collapsed. Alongside that, there have been significant changes within Downing Street itself, including the departure of senior advisors such as Morgan McSweeney, who stepped down from his role amid mounting pressure over the Peter Mandelson appointment. That is where the real political risks start to build, because more and more the perception is that when something goes wrong, it ends up being someone else's fault, not the Prime Minister's. Each time a controversy comes up, there's a response. Someone around the Prime Minister takes the blame, and then the government tries to move on. But when that keeps happening, people start to notice. It stops looking like accountability and starts looking like blame being passed around. And that's when the questions begin to shift, away from the individuals leaving and straight back to the leadership at the very top. This latest revelation is arguably the most damaging so far because it goes right to the heart of judgment, oversight and trust. And inside Keir Starmer's own camp, there will now be real concern about whether this is something that can still be contained, or whether this is the moment where the pressure becomes too much to manage. Because this is where the stakes shift. Once the conversation moves into whether Parliament may have been misled, everything becomes more serious. This is not just another political argument or media storm. In the UK system, this is about basic standards. The expectation that those in power are open and truthful with the public and with Parliament. And if there's even a suggestion that that standard has not been met, the pressure ramps up quickly. This is not something that can be smoothed over with a statement or a reshuffle. It demands clear, direct answers. And right now, there are still too many questions that have not been fully addressed. And all of this is happening at a time when people are already under pressure in their everyday lives. The cost of living is still high. Fuel prices are rising again. Global tensions are feeding into real-world problems that people can feel week to week. So when a political controversy like this breaks, it doesn't exist in a bubble. It lands in a moment where frustration is already there. And that is why it hits harder. Because people are not just reacting to one story, they're looking at everything together. And when they do that, it starts to shape a much bigger picture. And this is where everything now comes to a head. Because this is no longer just about one appointment, one mistake, or one explanation. It's about trust. It's about leadership. And ultimately, it's about whether the public and Parliament still have confidence in Keir Starmer to lead the country through a period that is already full of pressure and uncertainty. The coming days will be critical. More information may come out. More questions will need to be answered, and the pressure is unlikely to ease anytime soon. What happens next could define not just the controversy, but Starmer's entire premiership.